Thank you, Stephen. I am much obliged to you for doing me the honor of permitting me to do service tonight in this fashion. It's the first time seeing you virtually, Stephen, and I will cut out the crosstalk. I usually deplore it unless I'm doing it. When I met Stephen Todd, he had a mask on in the meeting, and then we ran into him in the grocery store. So I knew it was a very classy grocery store because he was there and we were too. And he had a mask on then as well. And I believe I did. I yanked it up and down. And so I'm delighted to see his, may I say, handsome visage. That having been said, I approached the prospect of leading tonight with a great deal of trepidation, because in our part of the world, and I haven't done it in very many years, a speaker meeting usually is about a half hour max. And frequently the custom is for anniversaries around here, you would have two individuals speak a half hour max each time. And then when the time is whittled down, it comes to 20 minutes. And the joke will be on me. I thought, my God, when Stephen said, I thought, my God, if I have to speak for 45 minutes, I'm accustomed, I believe that brevity is the soul of wit. And in my profession and in the type of work, the way I've earned a living, I must be very succinct in my emails, in my answers, in my executive doings. And I'm accustomed to editing and whittling down my remarks. So I thought, my Lord, how am I going to gibber? Yeah, and I hope it won't be gibbering for, let us say, 45 minutes. And the joke will be very much on me if Stephen has to get out the, I'm going to show my age, the old Ted Mack amateur hour hook and yank me, off the stage. But I have not prepared remarks. This will be entirely, or let's say, I'll hedge it, largely extemporaneous. I've not written anything down, except I have notes in my 24 hours a day book that I use every day. It's part of my 11th step formal practice in the morning. And when I get to how I first worked the steps, I found that certainly for doing a 4-step, not have the sort of extemporaneous was helpful for writing it. That doesn't make much sense, but I'll explain later. So I shall begin at the beginning. I was born in Norfolk, Virginia in 1950. And we lived in Tidewater, Virginia all my life. And my father was a practicing alcoholic who incidentally went into treatment at age 71. Where there's life, there's hope. And he died about 7-8 years after that. And to my knowledge, didn't have a slip with alcohol, but he certainly copped a couple prescription drugs of my mother's. But my father entered AA, he surrendered to AA, he had a sponsor, and my father was a highly educated, brilliant man, a historian, a journalist, and his sponsor was a foreman in a Nabisco cookie, whatever it was, plant. And I'm of the same view as my father on the subject of work. I believe that all lawful work is honorable work. All lawful work is honorable work. And that is a way that I look at the spiritual anonymity part, that it matters not if a person is on the factory floor or earns his or her living as an attorney or as a stockbroker or works from the home and does not earn a living per se that is salaried. I think all lawful work is honorable work, and I believe that deeply, and I have for many years. But it was a lot of tension growing up with my father's alcoholism, which of course got worse and worse, as it always does, until arrested. And I was baffled by, I couldn't understand it. I was just such a confused, fierce little girl, fiercely funny, I'm told fiercely bright, and fiercely PO'd because of the way my father would behave, and very confused. My father was courtly and handsome and well-spoken when he was sober, and the perfect gentleman. And then alcohol distorted him, as it does any of us. It distorts. It made him physically ugly. His mouth would be in a sneer. His eyebrows would go up like that kind of, and his face would be brick red. He would give off the smells that I'm sure I gave off too with my drinking, but I couldn't understand how he could do this to us and still love us. Yet I never doubted that he loved us. If the disease of alcoholism had anything to do with the rational mind or willpower, I certainly wouldn't have ended up an alcoholic, because I hated what it did to my father. I hated him when he was drinking, yet I adored him when he was sober. It was emotionally sort of whipsawed. And I forgot what I was going to say. I was an accident waiting to happen when I took the first drinks that I could take with impunity. I had graduated from a girls' high school. We were down at Virginia Beach, and it was people were getting booze, even though we were underage, beer, everything. And I drank. And I remember the room spinning and all this. And I thought, what is the matter with me? And it hit, and right then I can remember this thought process. I thought, you're drunk. This must be what father is. And you would think that the way I grew up and hating alcoholism and what it did to our household and how tense it made me all the time. And I'm a tense and highly strung person to this day. I'm not proud of it. It's just a fact. You would have thought if the rational mind had anything to do, I'd have said, oh no, the horror. I'm experiencing what father experienced. This is drunk. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm drunk. And I drank some more. And I drank till I passed out. And that was why I drank. Always. I drank really to turn off the switch, to turn off consciousness. And the next day in Virginia Beach, I woke up and I didn't have much of a hangover or anything. I was my father's daughter in that. And I started drinking again in the morning. And I did this for 4 or 5 days. And I was 18 years old and 17, whatever I was, young, strong. And I couldn't do that kind of jazz when I got home, forget it. So coming off the booze then, there were no physical consequences to me. I drank when I went to college. If people were around me, that was okay. If people were not around me, that was okay. But I had to have the booze, and I drank for oblivion. I remember the Joe and Charlie tapes. I think maybe their commentary on Bill Wilson and saying, soon he got to the point that he drank for the sickest reason of all. He drank for oblivion. I thought, well, my God, I went there like right away. When I think about it now, to the extent that a thought of a drink, the slightest thought, not a compulsion, but I associate it with oblivion. I'm very lucky that I do not romance the drink. The kind of alcoholism I have, or let me put it this way, the way I drank in a lot of volume. I drank from the time I was 19 I think it was by that time, I was a sophomore, junior at another girls' school, women's college. And I would drink the better part of a fifth of liquor a night, or a full screw top jug of cheap wine like Carlo Rossi. I drank a lot. And in my 20s, I had stuff happen to me. I lost many jobs because of my alcoholism. It wasn't like people pointed to me on the job and said, "You're drunk, you're fired," but it was my lousy attitude. I was fine with the boss if the boss really dug me and thought I was great, but I wouldn't bend or adapt or try to be. I was not a good employee. Sometimes, and I lost boyfriends that were more like extended encounters, but I would call them boyfriends. I wrecked cars. It was my own car, so okay, I would tell myself I didn't harm anybody. It was just a mess. It was just a mess. But I managed to go to graduate school, and at that time I moved. Well, I'd already moved prior to that into prescription amphetamines, uppers, and I like to do them. I like to do them in the morning. Maybe they were my hangover cure. I don't know, but I would have the amphetamines in the morning, and later on start the booze. I can remember when I was teaching school in Houston, Texas, because I lost the job I had as a buyer with a department store, and I taught at a private school in Houston. And this is the way my alcoholism, I had to orchestrate everything to enable my drinking to the maximum. And I lived very close to the school, and I loved it if I could arrange to have lunchtime and my free period, either before or after lunch. That meant 2 hours to drink in the middle of the day, whiskey. And even at that, and I'm sure I taught drunk. I know I did. I was very particular, even though I was a chain smoker, about how I thought I smelled. I wore very good perfume, and tons of breath mints, all that sort of stuff. But it had to come out of my pores. Why would it not have come out of my pores? Physiology is physiology. So when I can remember, and I want to illustrate with this, and it's I'm a very concrete person. My boss, who's 27 years younger than I, and I adore him, my boss said, "Maria, you're very concrete, you're very down to earth." When I would roll in, and I hope I don't offend anybody, when I would roll in when I was teaching school at 3 o'clock or whatever, I would visit the bathroom. And I remember thinking, I'm wasting a lot of time being in here when I could be drinking. I wonder if it would be more efficient if I would mix my scotch and water and have it sitting on the side of the tub, just waiting for me there, or have an ice bucket in here or something. But I mean, it was always about orchestrating my life around booze. And in 1979, I was 29 years old, and I had some clarity. I don't know why, but about my life and about my prospects. I had assumed that somehow along the way, I wouldn't have to earn my living for for the rest of my life. And I had a very good education at that time, but I didn't have a marketable skill. And I thought, what can I do? What can I do to improve my life? And I thought, well, the booze is really getting to me. It's getting to me. And one fine day, I decided I'll lay off drinking. I'd never tried to quit before. This is 1979, and I thought I'll lay off booze, and it's getting to me in the morning, drinking scotch. I went to the office very, very early. It's getting to me, and I will lay off booze for a day, and I bet I'll feel terrific. Ignorant totally of the physiology of alcoholism. And I stopped drinking, and I was apparently detoxing by myself and didn't realize it. I went into work, shaking, sweating, had to have someone drive me home. And I sat there in my 1-bedroom apartment in Houston, Texas. And I thought, what is the matter with me? I ought to feel great. I didn't drink any the night before. And all of a sudden, I thought, I know I'm a heavy drinker. I know I'm a problem drinker. And the words somehow came to me, you're just like Lon. You're just like your father. You're an alcoholic. You are. I thought, I am an alcoholic. And I'd like to say that at that time, I took the first step, but I didn't. And I was not in AA. I gave lip service. A day at a time, I didn't drink. I just didn't drink. I just didn't drink. And I gave lip service to God. I had been raised in a religious home, but gradually I took it back. I decided my willpower had made me sober. And I lived that way, dry, without this program, for 9 years. And I didn't white knuckle my way from not drinking, because a power greater than myself took away the compulsion and the desire to drink. But I was white knuckling my way through life. I was really, I didn't know how to live. And I was a very angry and frustrated and bitter person. When I eventually, part of my life plan, besides quitting drinking, that was a good thing to do insofar as it went, was to acquire a profession, which I did. And I went dry to law school, and that was not fun. Amphetamine use continued, but I always was powerful, I thought, over the amphetamines, because I only took them for exams till the 3rd year, when I took more than for exams. And I had studied very, very hard in law school, yet I failed the bar, not once, but twice, although I was from a high pass school and I had worked assiduously in law school. And let me tell you something, I felt so entitled to pass that bar and so angry with God and bitter because I had failed the bar twice. When I passed it the 3rd time, I was like, well, it's about time, buddy. So that was the savage state of mind I was in. I eventually moved up to Washington, got a job, and lived with my brother, who was then very active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he nagged me into going to meetings. And he would say, he'd come home from work, how many resumes have you sent? How many calls have you made? Have you been to a meeting? And I just thought, God, if he doesn't quit nagging me about going to these AA meetings. I said, look, I don't need to go to an AA meeting. I have not drunk, I would say, and it was true, in 9 years. I need in this town a job and a boyfriend, in that order. I don't need to sit around with a bunch of people. So I compared out. I would go under duress. I would compare out. And it was only when I stopped comparing out, and I had some superficial, silly basis to compare out, but it was only when I started really listening and doing what someone called in the meeting the simple physical act of raising my hand to share in the meeting, not buttonholing some poor person on the sidewalk later and spewing out all my nonsense, getting a sponsor, following the sponsor's directions. And I started feeling a part of instead of a part. And that was so important to me. That was surrender. That was the first surrender. And I've had many surrenders ever since. And I hope I continue to. I've always had a sponsor. And to the extent that I can be a jerk today, and I for sure can be, it's not from lack of being well, it's not that I haven't been well sponsored. And it isn't that I haven't called. I call and I stay in touch with my sponsors. I have a sponsor now today who helps me enormously. I'll talk about working of the steps. The first step, powerless over alcohol, I knew that before I came into the rooms and surrendered to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew I was powerless over alcohol. I knew that I never wanted a drink. I drank to get drunk. And the part that was hard for me was that my life had become unmanageable. I quit drinking. I quit drinking before I came into AA because I wanted to manage my life. That was why I did it. So that really didn't compute with me. Now I see that my life can be unmanageable when I act out my character defects, when I act as if I'm playing God in my own life, and that sort of thing. I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Although I never had a problem with the, as people say, with the concept of God or with praying. I prayed the prayers of my childhood, that liturgy, before I was in AA and when I was drinking and everything else. But I came to believe that a power greater than myself, meaning the people in the rooms, the fellowship, and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous could cure what ails me, could reform what is amiss in the temper and disposition of my soul. The third step was tough for me, and it can still be a stumbling block. And my present sponsor always says, when a certain step is troublesome, roll it back to the one before, and then roll it back to the one before that. Roll it, just keep rolling it back. The third step, the footwork thing and the outcome thing, and I just, with my poor first sponsor, Carol C., I said, what does it mean if God, if he then why doesn't he do the footwork? Why should I have to do the footwork? I'm very defiant, and I would just put it out there to her. And she said, look, have you made the third step says made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. Have you made a decision to stick with AA? I said, I most certainly have. And she said, and to stick with a spot, I have. She said, well, then you've done that. Just let that be what it is for now. And another thing about the third step that helped me a lot, forgive me, I have to drink some water. The first meeting that I would go to, and I went to this meeting 5 days a week, it was in downtown Washington. There was a woman there that was a really no-nonsense kind of person. Her name was Kathleen F. I adored her. She was from Calvert County, Maryland. She spoke in a real monotone voice. And she shared, and see, I thought at that time, I harbored the idea that a lot of people in the meeting were really kind of full of bull, that they were, acting like they were nicer than they were, or whatever. But Kathleen I liked because she was straightforward. She was my kind of gal. And Kathleen shared that her sponsor had told her to read the third step in the 12 and 12 every day for 30 days. And I thought, if a woman like this can do that, maybe I'll give it a go too. And when I read it, it screamed at me the part about our whole problem or our whole difficulty, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it in front of me, had been that we tried to bombard our problems with willpower. And it distinguishes willpower from willingness. And it talks as many of us are very, very familiar with. Willingness is the key that unlocks the door that had hitherto been closed. And that penetrated the carapace of my pride and of my ego. And Kathleen Foley did that for me because I found her credible from her own experience. She spoke for me, I guess, at my 10th anniversary, and it was so lovely. I don't even know if she's still with us on this earth, but she meant a great deal to me. And Mark L. in that meeting meant a lot to me. He talked about the simple physical act of, and I've alluded to this before, picking up the phone, calling your sponsor, opening your mouth, simple physical act in a meeting, sharing in a meeting, listening, assertively listening. Someone else in the meeting would say aggressive listening, listen. All these things meant a lot. And another thing that was revolutionary to me when I first came in, act your way into a new way of thinking. I had tried to think my way into a new way of feeling for such a long time. And I learned what act as if and act your way into a new way of thinking were to mean. But I've talked about the third step and the fourth. Oh boy, oh boy. My sponsor, Carol C., for my first fourth step, I wanted to do it because some friends of mine that had come into the fellowship, into the program around the same time they had done their fourth step. So I wanted to do it to keep up with the Joneses. And Carol rightly discerned that there was a lot of ego in that. You know, keep up with the Joneses about doing your phone, get it done so I could say I've done it too. Carol made me wait till I had been sober in AA for about 1.5 years. Now, how to do the thing. Well, I'll talk about the methodology that I used for that. And I alluded when I first started to, it was a spontaneous, I said extemporaneous, it was a spontaneity that I brought to it. And there are many, many ways to skin a cat. There are many, many ways to do a 4-step. There's the California, there's 956,000 interrogatories. There's the classic big book way, which is marvelous. And Carol shared with me that she had done her first 4-step, and it was very much by the big book. And she had written it thinking about how her sponsor would read it, because Carol was highly educated and her sponsor was a writer. And Carol had lined it, with the lines, and it was perfect and all that. And she said that it was okay as far as it went. It was the best she could do at the time. But then she wanted to drink over something. And she sat at a friend's kitchen table and seized the friend's grocery list and started scribbling on the back of it. And that spontaneous, unguarded, not trying to write it in a fancy or literary way, that was a 4-step that kept her sober and that really took, she felt. So I listened to that, and my mind, my God, it was just stuff rolling around and churning in it like raw sewage. I had so many resentments, so many fears, so much of this stuff. And I just kind of kept some kind of notebook with me and would just like jot it down, just spew it out there, and not to try to write it to make an impression on Carol, not to try to sound educated, not to try to sound anything, just let it out there. And I had resentments that made me real. It really did. I couldn't believe some of the stuff that came out because it was spontaneous. And when I went down to Carol and did that first 5th step, man, I was chain smoking there on her boat. She lived on a boat. It's a wonder we weren't both kippered from the smoke. And I wrote just what I read out loud just what I'd written. It sounded like a toddler wrote it. So-and-so hurts my feelings. So-and-so makes me mad. I hate so-and-so. So-and-so pisses me off. I don't like my boss. I'm mad at my father because he found a spouse, a mate, or whatever I said, a wife, and I'm single. And why should he have that and I don't have that? I mean, it was just it was puerile. And that's the way I was, puerile, childish, angry, immature, and honest, authentic me. And Carol sat there and she asked me for a cigarette and she had stopped smoking. I thought, my ego thought, oh my God, it's so horrible that I've driven her to smoke. I've driven her to smoke. Nah, she just wanted a cigarette. So she sat there and she would say, I did that. Or more than the doing, it was that my thinking was just so distorted and made me so unhappy. She'd say, I've thought that. I've thought that. I've thought that about my bosses. I've this and that. And it made me feel like I wasn't a freak. I wasn't just a moral degenerate freak, even though I wasn't drinking. That was my first fifth step. 6 and 7, I attend a 6 and 7 step meeting on Saturdays, and it's very helpful to me. I have come to see that, and this is not original, nothing I've ever, it's just whatever, that what can be shortcomings are sometimes assets that are out of whack, out of proportion. I've come to see that the longer I'm in the program. I felt I was not particularly responsible, so I had an overdeveloped sense of responsibility that could morph into pride and thinking I run my life. I flung money around like crazy. I tried to correct that. And sometimes a lot of the time, I can focus on material security as something I must have, to the detriment of keeping my eyes on the things that are spiritual things that neither moth nor dust can corrupt. 6 and 7, I cannot remove my defects of character. All I can do is humbly ask God to remove them and to name them and to do daily inventory. And I do that daily. I do it all through the day. And that's 10. And I am pretty good at making amends immediately when necessary. 10th step. 11 is very meaningful to me. I pray throughout the day. I try to be mindful. I've learned this from my present sponsor, who is a practicing Buddhist, who goes to a temple, who really does practice it, doesn't just allude to it and say she is. And I've learned about being mindful the act of eating, the act of washing my hands, the act of walking, working, all of it, to offer it up. And that's prayer throughout the day. And 12, I believe my program is light on service. I'm good at inventorying myself. It's light on service. So I appreciate Stephen asking me to serve tonight. I have one sponsee. I haven't had a great track record with sponsees, so I'm gun shy of it. Maybe that comes out when I get them. Maybe they get the feeling that I'm chary of doing it. I hope not, but maybe that's true. I don't know. But that is 12. I do believe that this program, and to try to practice the principles of this program in all my affairs, is the only way for me. And I'll close quickly, I hope, by alluding to when we were in Eastern Tennessee, Johnson City, in October. I was all freaked out about managing my life and managing my finances and my husband's finances, and managing, and fear of the future, fear. Pride and fear stand sentinel to keep God out. And I sat there in that meeting in Johnson City, and Stephen Todd was in that meeting, and I shared. I'd never been there before, and I shared honestly. I'm scared to death. I don't know where we're going to retire. I don't know how. I feel like I'm the Lone Ranger. And here's my husband, my nice husband, who's a partner in every way. And yes, indeed, I know how to have a partnership with him, with sponsor. And I hope I'm learning more with higher power. But I said, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. And I was like crying in front of these people. I was choked up. I looked up on the wall, and there on the clubhouse or whatever they call it at Central in Johnson City, it said, "You are not alone. You are not alone." And Stephen came up to me and introduced himself. And he gave me the name of a woman in Johnson City. And he told the woman I'd be calling her, and I'm in touch with her. And the guy that led the meeting is friends of ours now. And his wife is a friend. And we will see them. They even offered, this other couple even offered we could stay in their home when they come back. I thought, my gosh, the hospitality. But that, if opening my mouth in the meeting and just putting it out there really where I was, and notwithstanding my decades in the program, I sounded like a real messed up woman. But it was worthwhile to make that kind of contact and to be authentic. That's all out of me tonight, Stephen. Thank you for letting me share.